Hello everyone, welcome to Pagan Perspective. I'm Tara, your Tuesday Subsweek host, and I'm sorry that I've been missing the past couple of times, but things have been crazy. This week's topic is on protection. Not the sexual kind. Oh, I went there. Okay, so to address your first question, what are we protecting ourselves from? Well, it really depends. There are lots and lots and lots of things that it could be. It depends on the particular tradition that it's coming from, and it also depends on the beliefs of the particular person using it. Everyone has a slightly different take on it, and everyone would protect themselves from different sorts of things. It can be something very particular, like I've seen magical talismans designed to protect someone from being poisoned. There are protections to keep beings and spirits and entities from attaching themselves to you or entering your space uninvited. There are protections from curses and magical attacks and the evil eye and fairies and all kinds of things. I would like to put forward, though, that it's not always so much about protecting yourself from malevolent forces as it is about keeping out the unwanted in general. It's kind of like putting a lock on your bedroom door. It's not necessarily that you think that everyone is out to get you and people are going to come in and stab you in the middle of the night. It's probably more that you just don't want people wandering in uninvited randomly, because, that can be awkward. Alright, so second question. I wouldn't say that protection is a large part of my practice, but it is a part of it. For me, the question isn't so much what am I protecting myself from as why. And I think this is partly because I take a more psychological approach to the whole thing. I personally don't believe that there are any literal malevolent entities or negative energies out there that I need to protect myself from magically. So then the question really becomes, why do I use the concept of protection in this way at all? There's this concept within psychology called the locus of control, and I don't really want to go in depth into that, but I would like to pull out of that loosely this idea that the degree to which you feel that your efforts and actions have an effect on the things around you and that you have control over the outcomes in your life has an impact on your psychological health and overall effectiveness. People who feel like they don't have much of an effect on things or much control over outcomes are at much higher risk for depression. So if you take this idea of a certain kind of feeling of control and personal power being important for psychological health, and merge it with other ideas like the idea of the comfort zone and personal space and boundaries and home and property, you get close to a concept which helps to explain my perspective on this whole thing. For now, let's just call it your territory bubble. The idea of the comfort zone is often used in a very negative context, like you should step outside your comfort zone and try new things and explore new ideas and do things that challenge yourself and make you a little bit uncomfortable. But at the same time, the comfort zone is a place or state in which you feel no anxiety. You feel comfortable and secure and safe. You might also say that it's a place where you feel somewhat in control. So in this idea that I have of this territory bubble, it's not something that you necessarily could or would want to step outside of. You exist physically at the center of your own territory bubble. So the first level is just your physical body. The second level is your personal space, like your personal bubble. And then going further out, if it does go further out, are things like your personal belongings and your home or living space. Things that you have some degree or feeling of control over. The sort of things or places that you feel like people should have to have your permission to touch or mess with or enter. Throughout the course of your life, your territory bubble naturally shrinks and expands and moves around and adjusts to new environments and all sorts of things. But there's a core to it, and the boundaries of that core being maintained is extremely important to your psychological health. So there's really sort of a minimum size at which your territory bubble can exist and should be maintained to keep up your psychological health and well-being. Keeping with the idea that it's a good thing to step outside your comfort zone, it's not that you necessarily want to step outside your territory bubble, but it's a bad thing if it becomes too stuck in one place and the boundaries of it become too rigid. The ideal would be at least the minimum size, easily movable and adjustable, with flexible but strong boundaries. While the boundaries can move around and flex and shrink and expand and all kinds of things, it's extremely important that the boundaries be maintained. Anything or anyone crossing over that boundary without your permission is a violation. Having strong boundaries that are enforced and that you feel are respected rather than violated is extremely important to your mental health. And I don't think that it really matters how much you think that control really matters to you, how easygoing you are, how non-domineering, how hands-off, how willing to embrace chaos and spontaneity. Control within this territory bubble, at least its very minimum size, is important to everyone. Some of you may be wondering how this has to do with magical protection, but I swear I have a point. This may be generalizing and oversimplifying a bit, but it's my belief that magical protection is essentially the strengthening and maintaining of these borders. Now, some people might believe that this is happening quite literally on a physical or energetic or spiritual level. Personally, I think that when it comes to magical protection, it's more of a psychological level. These boundaries can be strengthened by your own actions, will, or power, whatever you want to call it, and or you could also enlist or receive outside help. Other people or even animals can guard or reinforce your boundaries, and some believe that you can receive the protection of a particular spirit or entity or deity. And then, of course, there are some who believe that there are certain powerful protective objects or substances that can be used to strengthen your boundaries as well. Counted among these things would be protective talismans or black salts or good luck charms even. When you're going through any sort of transition, when you're in a liminal state, the boundaries become weaker and more uncertain. And these are times when protection, or a feeling of protection even, is much more important and useful and emphasized upon. When you're in that sort of state, things that wouldn't normally bother you or have any sort of effect on you suddenly are a much bigger deal. It's kind of like when your immune system is down and something like the common cold, which wouldn't normally be that big of a deal, becomes suddenly life-threatening. Birth, for example, is a big transition, a very dangerous one, and a lot of societies, especially in ages past when mother and infant mortality rates were so high, would bestow upon the mother and the baby all sorts of physical and magical protections, in hopes that that would get them through that transition safely. That's kind of an extreme example, but I think even more minor transitions can fit this model. Protection isn't usually a big part of my practice, but it was a big part of my practice fairly recently, because I was going through a transition and it was a little bit difficult. I'd been living in the UK for a while, and then I moved back to the US temporarily because I'm actually moving back to England again soon. Anyway, there was a lot of things going on with that made that transition difficult, but even just the culture shock of coming back to the US alone is always really weird and a bit of a difficult transition. Anyway, in that difficult transition, I found that protective things were really helpful and comforting in getting me through that transition psychologically. The only other time that I use something that's close to this concept in my practice is before ritual. Sometimes when preparing for ritual, I will go around and focus on the boundaries of the space that I'll be working in. In order to get into the state of mind to have the kind of experience or do the kind of work that I want to do in ritual, I really have to be focused and feel comfortable and safe and secure and in control of my immediate environment. In order to get into that sort of comfortable, relaxed, focused state of mind, it's really important to get rid of all of the worries and distractions and things floating around in your head from the day. And it's important to me to feel a sort of distance between the everyday sort of world around me so that I'm not focused on or worried about that. When I'm going around the boundary of the room that I work in currently, the most significant part of it for me is the door. The door for me is the most likely and literal source of potential intrusion and interruption. And in that sense, it can become a source of worry and anxiety. This is especially the case because the room that I currently work in doesn't have a lock on the door. It is very possible that at any moment someone could barge in or knock on the door and interrupt me, or, any of those sort of things that I would rather avoid. But in the end, the possibility of that happening isn't as big of a deal as my worry about it happening distracting me. So when I feel like things outside of that room are distracting me or might intrude, I go around the border of the room and I sort of mentally seal everything off all the way around. And once I've done that, it makes me feel more safe and secure and protected and isolated and focused. So I sort of seal up the door in my mind, and I tell myself no one is going to come through this door. Now, I don't literally believe that my act of doing that makes it so that no one's going to come knock on the door or come through the door. I don't believe that I'm actually protecting myself from that, so much as protecting myself from my own worries. In doing that symbolic action of protecting myself and sealing up the door, what I'm really doing is placing my worries and anxieties outside the door. I don't know if I would call this circle casting, but it is very similar to it, and I know that some circle casters consider it a form of protection and some people don't. What all of those groups have in common, I think, is this idea that you choose what exists within the circle and what exists without the circle. It doesn't necessarily have to just be malevolent forces or beings that you're excluding with this circle. It can also just be things that are distracting or unhelpful to you for what you're trying to do in that space at that time. You have to feel in control and safe within that space. It has to be your comfort zone, without any anxiety, without any worries, so that you can get into the state of mind that helps you to do the things that you want to do in that space. Anyway, I've probably blabbered on for way too long, so I should probably just stop. Thank you to Wisps and Whimsy for such a great question. To any of you who celebrate Samhain or Halloween or anything else around this time of year that I'm unaware of, I hope you have a fabulous one. I wish you all the best.